Brexit might be looming. Boris Johnson says it will deliver billions more for the NHS and insists our health service isn't for sale in a post-Brexit trade deal with America.
Our National Health Service will not be on the table.
But is this true?
Everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else.
Tonight on Dispatches, we discover how President Trump's allies and US drug giants want to force the NHS to pay more for US medicines.
I don't know what the UK government means when it says the NHS is off the table.
We hear of secret meetings and how British trade officials are being asked to censor their emails.
The UK, in a Brexit situation, is going to be the weaker negotiating party.
And we show the potential costs to the NHS if President Trump gets his way.
I don't think people have any idea how much money is involved here.
Me hide?
Yeah.
Oh.
20-year-old Kira lives in Nottingham with her 2-year-old son Theo. Until recently, she didn't even have the strength to lift him. Last year, she was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, a debilitating bowel condition. Kira? Hello, Anthony from Channel 4. Hello, thank you very much. What kind of symptoms did you have?
Severe gastric pain, being sick. I was in hospital at least once or twice a month. I was losing weight, and then I started bleeding when I had a bowel movement. Your bowels just stop working at all, so you can't go to the toilet, you can't eat. It was so painful all the time, there was no relief.
How did they treat you? What medicines did they put you on initially?
I was put on a steroid. It just wasn't helping. This is me with something that they call moon face, the swelling of like your cheeks when you're on steroids. It changes your mood as well, so I had very low times.
How did it affect Theo, your son?
I couldn't take him to the park. I couldn't do just mum things with him. There's days where I'd just cry, and he started to realise something wasn't quite right, so it was really, really hard.
In April this year, Kira's life was transformed when the NHS put her on a medicine called Humira, made by an American drug company.
It comes with 2 in a box.
So it's an injection, is it?
Yeah, once every 2 weeks.
Humira isn't cheap. Last year it cost the NHS more than £450 million, more than any other drug. And so you started taking Humira. How quickly did you notice a change?
Oh, very quickly. This is very recent, off steroids and on Humira.
Amazing, that transformation. You look so much healthier, and
yes.
And Theo looks much happier as well.
Yeah. He's got his mum. Since I've been taking Humira and no longer on any steroids.
Humira may be expensive, but the NHS was able to strike a hard bargain with the US manufacturer and get it for 7 times less than it can cost in America.
At one point I thought I was never going to be able to come off steroids. I felt loads better. I did say you could have an ice cream.
It's great to see that Kira's getting her life back on track, but Dispatches has discovered that the price we pay for medicines, like the ones Kira and thousands of others rely on, is likely to be a key part of trade negotiations with America after Brexit, and the NHS could end up footing the bill. I've come to Burford in the Cotswolds. It's home to Britain's oldest pharmacy. The medicines we pick up from our pharmacies and hospitals cost the NHS £18 billion a year. That's more than we spend on roads, prisons and the police combined. So when was this shop opened?
1734.
So those original bottles, are they? Or are they just
the original bottles?
The NHS drug bill could be a lot more if it lost the power to drive down the price of the medicines it buys. Take Humira, the drug that transformed Kira's life. This packet cost the NHS £1,400, but in America it would cost more than £8,000. And here's another drug called Eliquis, used to treat strokes and blood clots. These tablets cost the NHS less than £60, but in America they would cost more than £350. And the NHS strikes similar deals right across the board. Boris Johnson has made getting a trade deal with the US a priority after Brexit, but insists the NHS is not on the table.
We can quadruple our trade with UK.
Always remembering that the NHS is not for sale.
He might say the NHS isn't for sale, but could a trade deal with America affect the price we pay for our medicines? While little is being said about this in Britain, it's a different story in America. The US is home to some of the world's biggest drug companies. There's no NHS, and the prices they charge are higher here than anywhere else in the world.
Americans spent $360 billion, that's with a B, on prescription medications.
And the rocketing price of prescription medicines is a hot political issue.
Drugs that can cost more than what the average American makes in a year.
The question of who's to blame for spiralling US drug prices is now firmly on the political agenda. President Trump is quick to blame foreign freeloaders, including us Brits, who he believes get their medicines on the cheap.
It's time to end the global freeloading once and for all. I have directed U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer to make fixing this injustice a top priority with every trading partner.
The Office of the US Trade Representative negotiates America's trade deals. They've already gained key concessions on drug prices from South Korea, Mexico and Canada. I'm on my way to meet with Stephen Vaughan, who until April this year was the General Counsel for the Office of the US Trade Representative. He was one of Trump's top trade negotiators, and whilst he was in the post, the US published its objectives for a trade deal with the UK. On the agenda is how Britain decides which drugs it buys and for how much. US drug firms claim our system stops them getting full market access. The US Trade Representative, when you were there, said one of the key things was to ensure full market access for US products, US pharmaceuticals. The US wants the UK to pay more for their drugs. Would you envisage that would be part of any negotiation?
I would expect U.S. negotiators to, see what we could do in terms of getting increased access to the British market. That's what we do.
So it's something that will have to be discussed.
I think it's going to be likely to come up because the U.S. mentioned pharmaceuticals in its negotiating objectives.
What happens when you have the other side say, well, the NHS is not on the table?
Well, that really goes to the question of what the UK government means when it says the NHS is off the table, and I don't know what they thought they meant when they said that. You can always try to take certain things off the table, but is that a package that's going to be attractive to the President? Is it going to be a package that's going to be attractive to the Congress?
So what is your message to those that might be alarmed that we might be seeing higher drug prices and more expensive medicines coming into the UK?
If the UK really is determined to make no changes at all on pharmaceuticals, they can absolutely hold that position. But if you do that, that will obviously affect the overall negotiations. It doesn't have anything to do with us. That's up to y'all.
It's no wonder US trade negotiators are preparing to take a tough line with the UK. The powerful pharmaceutical industry is pushing them hard. Earlier this year, the lobby group which acts for large US drug firms spelled out exactly what they want from a deal with Britain. It's clear that US drug companies have the NHS in their crosshairs. They accuse the UK of engaging in actions that distort markets and artificially depress prices. As well as the NHS haggling down the price of drugs, British regulators can block medicines they believe don't offer value for money. Protections the US pharmaceutical lobby wants to sweep away. They want to see full market access for US products and competitive market-derived pricing. In other words, they want us to pay more for their medicines. And it's clear the American drugs industry is prepared to dig deep to get what it wants. It's spending an awful lot of money lobbying. In the past 2 years alone, pharma industry has spent more than $500 million, and that's more than the alcohol, tobacco and defence industry combined. The pharma lobby's demands have been picked up by influential US politicians. I've come to meet one of President Trump's closest allies. He's introducing a law called the Fixing Global Freeloading Act. It would put drug prices at the heart of all new American trade deals. The US and UK are currently in discussions about a trade deal. How important is to get this on the table?
I think it needs to be part of the negotiations where we look at prescription drug prices.
And that's what your act aims to address?
Well, my aim is to have pharmaceutical negotiations being part of any international negotiation. Why should an American patient have to pay $1,000 for a drug when other countries can buy the same drugs at a fraction of the cost? So we need to make sure that everybody pays their fair share. And so we're looking at how we can best make that happen.
And if the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says this drug pricing is not on the table, what impact would that have?
I'm not going to comment on what the Prime Minister may or may not say.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Mark Meadows believes that drug pricing has got to be part of any US-UK trade deal, and he believes he's got President Trump and the political wind behind him. But how likely is President Trump to get what he wants from the UK? To hear him in is a British lawyer based in America who's an expert on US trade deals.
The UK, in a Brexit situation, is going to be the weaker negotiating party. And if we take into account how the US has negotiated similar agreements with other countries, they have inevitably got what they wanted.
So although the British government might not want to concede on some of these points, what you're saying is that looking at recent agreements, the US pharmaceutical industry has got its way.
It certainly has, and it will certainly be lobbying hard to push its agenda in these agreements. And they basically want to turn it into a system whereby it's the pharmaceutical companies who set the prices.
Back in Nottingham,
You've got it!
Kira's had a letter from her consultant. The NHS wants to switch her from her American drug to a new medicine that's just as effective but much cheaper. It's another way the NHS saves money. They're saying it does exactly the same, but it's going to be a lot cheaper. What did you feel when you got this letter?
I was, apprehensive, but also very excited.
The NHS plans to switch more than 35,000 patients off Humira, saving £150 million a year. That's equivalent to thousands of extra doctors and nurses.
The NHS is so important to everybody in this country, and it's going to save them hundreds of millions of pounds by just changing this one drug. So to think of how much money that could be put into other things in the NHS, it's really important.
When do you pick up your first batch of this new drug?
I get my first delivery on Wednesday, and I will take it for the first time on Thursday.
2 days later, Kira's new drug arrives. It's called Imraudi.
Sorry, please.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
A trade deal with President Trump could force the NHS to wait a lot longer before they can offer patients like Kira cheaper medicines like this.
What they want, in simple terms, is they want to have less competition so that they can control the market and the prices for longer.
So cheaper alternatives wouldn't be allowed on.
Exactly.
So
if we look at Humira as an example, the US doesn't have any competition for Humira, and it won't have it until 2023. Whereas now in Europe and the United Kingdom, there is competition and prices have dropped 80%.
Coming up, we discover that behind closed doors, UK trade officials have been discussing drug pricing with their American counterparts.
Medicines pricing in the United Kingdom is too significant an issue and too important for us to maintain for us to go down that path.
And we learn about the potential cost of President Trump's plan for our National Health Service.
We've got to go in with our eyes open, understanding just the crazy amounts of money that are involved.
In America, we've heard how President Trump and US drug firms want the NHS to pay more for medicines as part of a post-Brexit trade deal. And the drug giants are putting huge efforts behind closed doors into getting their way. American drug companies seem to be spending an awful lot of time and money on telling US politicians and the government about what they want from any trade deal with the United Kingdom. But when it comes to speaking to us, they seem to be a lot more reticent. I've made repeated requests to speak to the industry's main lobby group, but they've turned me down every time. So I've come to a downtown New York hotel, where the drug firms are meeting at a conference organised by the Financial Times. Do you have a few minutes for a quick interview with Channel 4 from the UK?
I will decline.
Nobody will talk to us.
That's probably the way it's supposed to be.
No, I'm not supposed to talk to...
The press?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, I really would, but I just can't.
They wouldn't talk, but I did find someone who knows the industry inside out.
I think they're very cautious. Drug pricing is one of the biggest political issues here in the US. You see that with, President Trump coming out every other week with a new proposal.
What is US Pharma looking to get from any US-UK trade deal?
They want higher prices and more access is what they would say. So there are drugs the NHS has said are not really good value for money, and they want to get in there and have those drugs on the market in the UK.
When you hear Prime Minister Boris Johnson say the NHS is off the table, what do you make of that?
I think that the NHS is obviously very important to British voters, and in some of the sort of core ways maybe the UK government will try and protect it. But in terms of pharmaceuticals, I think that there could be significant changes there.
What role do you?
I work in pricing.
So you're the expert, you know everything about pricing. Will we see drug prices go up in the NHS if there's a trade deal with the US?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay, thank you. So could we have a quick interview with you, please?
No.
But why not? We only want to talk about drug prices in the US and the UK.
Don't speak on the record.
No, well, you work for a very big US drug company. Can we not chat to you about it? It seems, particularly when it comes to big US pharma, they seem to be scared to talk about drug pricing and any US-UK trade deal. Maybe time to go home. We've got as far as we can in America. But back in the UK, Dispatches gets a breakthrough. Someone with knowledge of the trade talks has agreed to talk to us, and they've got a dramatic revelation. It's about 6 official meetings between British trade negotiators and their US counterparts. Precise details of what's being discussed is being kept strictly confidential. But a Whitehall source has told us that drug pricing has been on the table in all 6 meetings. And that's not all. Dispatches has been told that as well as meeting with the US government, senior British trade officials have held face-to-face meetings with representatives of US drug firms, none of which have been declared. Our source told us there had been 5 secret meetings between senior British civil servants and the US pharma industry, 2 in Washington and 3 here in London. The most recent being in August after Boris Johnson had become Prime Minister. The source told Dispatches that drug price caps were discussed in at least one of these meetings. Former Conservative Health Secretary Andrew Lansley thinks the government should rule out drug pricing from a trade deal with America.
Medicines pricing in the United Kingdom is too significant an issue and too important for us to maintain for us to go down that path. The Americans have set out what their negotiating objectives are. They did that back in February. Actually, the British government should set out what our negotiating objectives are. It would be a start. We don't at the moment know what those are.
In Nottingham, it's time for Kira to take her new medicine for the first time. How are you feeling at the moment?
Yeah, okay.
Imraldi is known as a biosimilar. Like generics, these are cheaper alternatives to new medicines. So this is a Humira, the branded medicine made by the US drugs company that you were taking.
Yes.
And this is Imraldi, the new medicine.
Yeah. These are the injections.
Oh, they're quite big, aren't they? Where will you inject that?
Into my thigh.
The drugs Kira has been taking are part of a wave of high-tech medicines known as biologics. They are revolutionizing the treatment of conditions such as cancer, arthritis and diabetes. So how was it?
Okay, it stung a lot more than Humira does, but it's definitely manageable. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
But biologics are very expensive. They've helped drive the NHS drugs budget up by 20% in the past 5 years. And costs could soar even more after a trade deal with America. Andrew, hello, hi, nice to meet you. You've been looking at potential impact on drug prices in any US-UK trade deal.
Yeah, my research...
Dr. Andrew Hill is an expert on global drug pricing and advises the World Health Organization.
With this drug, Humira, the NHS managed to negotiate a low price for the branded version. If we were following the US model, not able to negotiate prices, not able to import generics, just for that one drug, we'd be spending an extra £2.9 billion a year.
We asked Dr. Hill to calculate how much extra the NHS would have to find if it was to pay American prices for all medicines.
Our annual drugs bill for the NHS is £18 billion. If we had to have American drug prices, we're talking about £18 billion a year going to £45 billion. So that's an extra £27 billion a year, or £500 million a week extra for the NHS to pay.
And that would take the drugs bill to a third of the current total NHS budget.
That is a big figure, but that's if the UK government rolled over and accepted everything that US pharma and the US government wants. I mean, that's not how trade negotiations go. What kind of Prime Minister is going to sign a trade deal that's going to add £27 billion to NHS costs?
I think there's very little understanding about just how high US drug prices are and how these trade negotiations could lead to these high drug prices. Donald Trump has said he wants to see higher drug prices for foreign governments. I don't think people have any idea how much money is involved here. I think everybody needs to go into this with their eyes wide open.
The problem is we're in the dark about what the government's real plans are. All we could find was a small report that appeared in The Sun in August. The article states that an unnamed Downing Street official allegedly wrote a letter to Trade Secretary Liz Truss saying that measures affecting the NHS cannot under any circumstances form part of an agreement. And it goes on to ban internal discussions of issues like drug pricing from her department. We asked the government whether the Sun article represents official policy. They wouldn't tell us. We asked for an interview with Trade Secretary Liz Truss. That was also declined. But once again, dispatches discovered what was really happening in her department. Instead of being banned from discussing drug pricing, civil servants have merely been told to change the words they use. A source has told us that UK trade officials are discussing issues that could affect the NHS, but have been told to stop using phrases like drug pricing and use terms like valuing innovation instead.
You can pretty much bet that the issue of how drug pricing is done and how it's set in the UK will be on the table. The question is whether it will have the words NHS in the agreement. The likelihood is it will be a coded language. Anybody reading it will not understand whether there's any effect on the NHS pricing system.
We went back to the Department for International Trade for a response to what we've discovered. In a statement, they said, "The sustainability of the NHS is an absolute priority for the government. We could not agree to any proposals on medicines, pricing or access that would put NHS finances at risk or reduce clinician and patient choice."
Round and round the garden.
Kira is enjoying more quality time with Theo. The future of the NHS and how it affords to treat patients like Kira is likely to move to centre stage as political events unfold in the coming weeks. As we've discovered, much is happening behind the scenes. Will the truth be forced into the open?
See, look.
Next week, Dispatches investigates Dominic Cummings and Seamus Milne, the unelected advisers sitting behind the two main party political leaders.
Both party leaders have chosen people who hate the British state. Both of them basically want to smash it up.
And you can see Puppet Masters, the men who really run Britain, in Dispatches next Monday night at 8. And on Wednesday night at 10, a comic but slightly alarming look into the surreal world of Russian telly, in the world according to Vladimir Putin. Next tonight, though, our travel man is sort of saving the world by spending 48 hours in Bergen.